to get graphics on the screen, but really isn't that interesting or fun to just draw graphics. Sure, you can make greeting cards and send them to people, but the reality is most of us want to make interactive games. So I want to look at one of the more modern ways to get input into a game, and that's to use a mouse. So I'd like to develop a little toy program that'll allow us to investigate how the mouse works and walk through how we determine what we need in order to work with the mouse. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a program that I'm going to develop in pieces. The first thing I want to do is check to see if I can find the location of the mouse on the screen and then report that somewhere. Once I have that tested and working, the next thing I want to do is see if I can register a mouse click and use that mouse click to create some sort of interactivity on the screen. So let's go ahead and get started and begin with looking at how we would discover this. So when you get started and you're preparing for something like this, what you should do is go look at the documentation. So here I've pulled up the PyGame documentation. Let me squeeze this in here. All right, so what you're looking at is the documentation by the people who made PyGame. And basically, if you really wanted to figure out how all of this worked, you could go through here and just click on these one at a time, read all the stuff in it. But I don't want to do that right now. We're very focused. So let's look at an example of one way we might use this. Let's look at the draw functions that are available in PyGame. So this is a list of the different things that we can draw in Python using PyGame. We can draw rectangles, polygons, circles, ellipses, arcs, lines, and anti-alias lines. Now you can also draw fonts, but that's a little more complicated, and we may look at that in the future. And you'll see over here we have a link to fonts, and we can look at the different ways we can work with fonts. But just real quick, I want to look at circles. So here we have the draw circle function. We're going to be using a circle in this program. And to create a circle, you see here that we have to have the surface that we're drawing to, the color that we want the circle to be, its position, the radius or half the width of the circle, and then this width tells us how big that circle is going to, or how big the line drawn around the circle is. Now if we set that to 0, it's going to completely fill in the circle. So that's useful information for us to know. Now for this actual program that we're going to be writing in this application, we're going to represent the location of the circle as a rectangle. Now if you've ever researched game design, you know one of the concepts for objects on the screen is to give them a hitbox, and that hitbox will allow you to determine if collisions have occurred with that object. Well, if you think hitbox, box is a rectangle. So rectangles are going to be one of the foundational objects that we're going to use to represent things in our games. And when we look at the rectangle class, you'll see there's several functions here. We can move rectangles, we can inflate or resize them. We can find if two rectangles are joined together. We can ask if a rectangle contains another rectangle. We can determine if a point is colliding with a rectangle or another rectangle is colliding. So there's a lot of different ways that we can look at collisions and determine if things are within that rectangle. What we're most interested in right now, though, is when I click on the screen, I want to relocate the circle I'm going to draw. And so I want to know how to reposition this rectangle. And again, the rectangle is just going to be the abstract representation of it. All we're using the rectangle for is for the X and Y position, and we're going to be able to use that X and Y position to get other information. So here you see that we can refer to the rectangle by XY, top left, bottom or right, and we also can ask it for its center, its size, its width and height. So there's different ways that we can reference this rectangle, and this is one of the really cool things about Python that's unique to this language. There may be other languages out there that have a robust library like this, but this is pretty unique to Python from what I know. So this is information that we're going to use to create our application. Now what we want to do is, when I move the mouse, I'm just going to say where the mouse is at. When I click, I want to move this circle there. So how do I actually interact with the mouse? So if we look up here, you will see we can look at, we're looking for events. Okay, event. So here we go, events. And we want to check for certain events. Now, we've already looked at one way to look for an event, and that event was quit. The quit event is when we close the window. But we want events that work with mice. And you'll see there are 3 events here that deal with mice. We have mouse motion. That's going to be when we move the mouse. We have mouse button up and mouse button down. So another important thing to know here, this mouse button up and mouse button down is kind of, you need to know that that is a unary thing. So the button down only occurs when you've pushed the mouse button down, and the button up only occurs at the moment that you release that mouse button. So it's not a continuous, oh, the button's up, the button's up, the button's up. No, it only happens when that transition happens. We're going to use when you release the button. You can do it when you press the button to track where we've clicked. I prefer to do it on what's called the falling edge, or the tail end of it. It's just a little bit cleaner. And if we get into a later series, we may talk about how to test for mouse dragging. And in that case, you again want to check for that falling edge click where you're releasing the mouse button. Okay, so now that we've looked at the documentation, let's go ahead and look at how we would implement this code. So the very first thing we want to do is go ahead and get our imports in there. And again, we're going to be importing PyGame and sys. Not sure we're going to import anything else just yet, but you never know. Again, we want to initialize our game. We're going to set the size of the window. And feel free to use different values for your games. I'm just using numbers that I'm familiar with. 640 by 480 being a very common size for video games in the 80s and early 90s. Alright, and the location of the circle on my screen, it does feel a little weird to be storing it as a rectangle, but you're going to see it's going to work just fine. And what you can do is imagine this rectangle being like a box around the circle that we're going to draw. It's circumscribing the circle. Okay. And then I want to store the X and Y location of the mouse. I'm going to call it X and Y. Normally I wouldn't use bad variable names like this. I would call it mouse X, mouse Y, but I kind of wanted to reduce my typing a little bit for this exercise. And then I do want to define some colors so I can draw. So I'm going to create a black. And let's go ahead and create yellow. And if you're interested in other colors, you can go look up on the internet. You could Google, say for example, you wanted army green. You could say, what is the RGB values for army green? And it'll give you back the numbers. So if you're interested in mixing your own colors, it's a good way to do that. Okay, so let's go ahead and get the screen set up. Okay, so there's our screen. And then our game loop. Okay, so the first event that we're going to check for is the quit. And again, we want to quit the game, and to be compatible with both Python 3 and 2.7, we do the system exit. Alright, and we're going to add another event in here, and that's going to be the mouse motion. Okay, and when we move the mouse, here's what we're going to do. I looked this up earlier, and it turns out that we can set that title bar using the set caption function. And what I want to put there is the location of the mouse. and I'm going to use a neat little string trick here. You can do string formatting. This may not be compatible with Python 3.0. You may want to check with your Python documentation to see how to translate this for Python 3.0. Okay. Let's go ahead and fill our background. And then flip our display. Okay, so let's save and test this. Okay, oops. Okay, I had to take a little pause there for a little debugging. I had a little bit of a mistake here, but I went ahead and corrected it. So again, we were at the mouse motion, and we're going to display this caption on the title bar. So when I run it, you'll see when I move the mouse, it updates the location of the mouse in the title bar. Very good. Okay, so that's the mouse motion. How would we do the mouse button? So let's go ahead and look at that real quick. So again, it's an event. Add in the event. Event.type equals pygame.mouse button up. And what we're going to do here is we're actually going to relocate the center of that rectangle. So we're going to get the position from the event there. And we're going to need to draw the rectangle on the screen. So let's go ahead, and I said I wanted to draw it as a circle. So we'll draw it to the screen. We're going to draw it in the yellow color. And we're going to use the center of the rectangle as the center of the circle. And I want to draw it 50 pixels wide so it'll be circumscribed in that rectangle. And then I'm going to get a line width of 5. So this is going to draw the outline of the circle. Okay, so let's save that. So basically we're testing to see if the mouse button has been released, and when it's released we're relocating the rectangle around the circle to where we release the mouse button, and that'll be the center, and then we're going to draw that circle at the center of that. So now when I run this, I started it at 50-50, but when I click, you'll see where I click it moves the circle to the mouse. So I want you to think about this application and how you might use it to create an interesting game. Maybe you could create a shooting gallery game with this, or something like Duck Hunt. The sky's the limit. But I hope you enjoyed this. Please feel free to give me feedback in the comment section on things you'd like to see, or what you thought you liked about this or didn't like. But please keep it civil. And again, have a great time and enjoy coding.